Thank you all for joining us. I forgot about my intro. So my first few slides I have our intro. I will share my screen and I will provide the PDF for my notes because there's some slides I will skip through pretty quickly, but I want people to have that knowledge if they need it. I also want to acknowledge before I throw the screen up, talking about my work in the community, I am dressed casually on purpose. As many of you may recognize the shirt and you'll probably see it around campus. Last week was Bike to Work Day. So one of the things I tried to do is practice what I teach. And that is biking to campus when I go to campus to teach and present and work. So I will share my screen. So give me a moment here. And I'm going to share that extra screen. Can you all see that first slide?
Yes.
And I do tend to teach pretty casually. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to jump in, feel free to stop me, feel free to say, wait, I already know that, can we move on? I did gear this talk a little bit towards beginners and special populations somewhat, but to the general population. So we may have some athletes on here. I've also done that. My opinion is anyone who moves is an athlete. So looking at all ranges of physical activity. So I'm going to just go down one slide here. We already heard a little bit about me, but why am I talking to you today and why is my viewpoint different from what you may have heard before? As mentioned, I am a non-traditional PhD student. I put that in there. I had someone once tell me I shouldn't say I'm non-traditional, but I think aging, which is part of this talk, is important to acknowledge. I have not always been an exerciser. I had my undergraduate degrees in different fields, a career in operations management, doing very different things. I had a career change in several years ago. And when I first went back to school, I received my personal training certification. So that kind of started me on this path. But I think most of this was already mentioned. I do teach several courses in kinesiology, community health, and eye health as a graduate student. So I've been lead instructor on several classes, including physical activity and health, health policy and aging, intro to community health, and that was during the COVID pandemic, which was rather surreal. So that was just a little bit about me, some pictures. I do bike to work, hence my bike shirt. But what I do like to share a little bit about myself, or that that direction I'm coming from, is my motivation, because I'd like you all to think about your motivation as to why you're here today or why you want to move. It's different for everybody, and there is no right or wrong. That big career change that I made when I was over 40 years old, I had started running on a bet with my youngest son, who is in the pictures. He's 5 years old in the cast, about 13, where he's running with the long hair, and then defending his dissertation defense last year at about 26 in the picture there. But when he was about 13 there, running across country at Uni High here in town, I made a comment to him. I said, hey, you know, if you shave a couple minutes off your running time, you could maybe make the varsity team. I had no idea what I was talking about at the time, none. So he looked at me, as lippy teenagers will do, and said, well, you think it's so easy, you try it. And we started that on a bet. Now, he is the youngest of 4 kids, and you can see my boys in the other pictures here. They didn't start running until after we started running. So for me, it's very much a family type thing. It was about 12 years ago now, I guess, that our whole family changed, our whole family dynamic about how we look at physical activity, how we look at being active and why we want to be active changed from that one lippy teenager. And I kind of laugh at it because that picture of him in his cast when he was 5, he broke his leg in a sledding accident. And so when I made that comment to him, it wasn't out of malice, it wasn't out of competition, it was just, he was a teenager, healthy and happy. And what can we do? So we had a bet. If I could run a 5K, he would learn to water ski, which was my summer job in college. And I won the bet. I run the 5K. He never learned to water ski though. So that's okay. It had that benefit for our entire family. Up in the top corner, there's a picture of my extended family with my cousins and their children. And this was several years ago now. But it's shortly after I started running, before I made the career change. And my uncle wanted to have a competition on vacation out on the Jersey Shore. We all met up for vacation, and he decided he was going to have a family competition about running the 5K that was there at that time. And one of the things I noticed, if you look in the picture, we're all ages, right? There's little ones, there's older ones. My uncle was in his upper 70s at the time. So this was the first year we ran. The second year we ran, he did individual prizes, things, or family prizes, things like most improved, first to the finish line. But we all live in different states, and we all came together for this family event. So for me, my motivation is my family, being able to be active with my family. In the middle, I have my oldest son who didn't start running until after I did. I actually beat him in my first half marathon, his first half marathon, my second half marathon. I had beat him, and he said, "Mom, you always tell people that." If you look at our size difference, our strides, his stride alone, he should have been able to beat me. He didn't train. I trained that year. And as we're running along at about mile 5, he says, "Mom, I can't go this fast. I can't go this slow. I'm pretty slow when I run." He said, "I can't go this slow." I said, "No worries. Do your thing." And he took off at mile 5. I caught him at mile 10. And with his training, he was in some severe pain. He had not trained well, so he barely finished. He said, "Mom," I helped him a little bit. I call it my mommy minutes, and helped him uh, recover a little bit with some stretching and flexibility, which we'll talk about. And then I went in and finished and waited for him. Next year, his goal was to beat my mom. So mind you, he was in his 20s. I was over 40. I had not started exercising till over 40. His daughter now runs cross country as well. So these changes kind of rippled through our family. And I just have pictures of my dogs just for fun. But when I made that change in careers, I went back to school to Parkland for a year. I thought, well, let me just see if this is what I want. I didn't know what exercise was. I didn't know what physical activity was. Lots of things. I got sweaty, heart rate, all these terminology things that we throw out, we hear. What does it really mean? And so for me, I was at a point in my life, my youngest was going off to college, and I took a leap of faith and made a career change. Did my personal training certification at Parkland College, doing some undergraduate degrees in nutrition and the certification. Then moved on to U of I as a research coordinator, working with research on the Fit Kids project. It was a large project that is actually quoted later in my slides here, but is straight out of the University of Illinois, so it's pretty cool stuff. But my mission statement that I wrote is there on the screen, that I will use my education in kinesiology and management experience to identify and reduce barriers to healthy lifestyles while encouraging positive, healthy lifestyle changes for underserved individuals and communities. And in some ways, we're all underserved, and in other ways, we're not. There is some health disparity in what physical activity or fitness means, and I will talk about those things as well. I was asked to write a statement when I was the research coordinator working on the R01 NIH grant with Fit Kids, with families, and I was working on my master's degree at the time. And I was asked to write a statement. And so I was writing that statement, why I do and why it's important, and adding those terms being accessible to everyone. So what I've learned as I changed careers, we can learn what we need for ourselves, but also learning what I'm giving back is a different viewpoint. So while I'm not a traditional kinesiologist, I didn't start exercising till I was older. I understand that there are barriers, and we'll talk about some of those. But I also understand there are things that we can do to make things easier and more accessible, and what's okay for us if we're busy today, what's okay for tomorrow. So I do try to make my research more useful to people and to the community, more applied research. And that's where I am kind of falling right now. So I'm a community member first, a researcher second, and my contact information is there. I would like to just start off. So I guess to sum up, that was a little bit about me in the context of what physical activity and exercise mean. I have had ebbs and flows in my own physical activity and my own exercise. It's not a light switch that we turn on and turn off that where we are exercising or physically active or what level we are. So thinking about that in the context of health, many times we'll go to the doctor or we'll have a health issue and someone will say, oh, exercise for your health, or you need to get some exercise. But what does that really mean? And what does it mean to you? What does it mean maybe to your family? What does it mean to your community and the people around you? And as people change through some of these things, these are hurdles that we find. My family didn't start running with me automatically. The son that I started the bet with, he doesn't run anymore, actually. In fact, but I want to talk about what some of these terms might mean to us. And as I'm talking about them, what do they mean to you? So health, a definition of health is that we often use in teaching or as the basis. It's not necessarily merely the absence of disease and infirmity. You can have a chronic disease or a chronic illness and still be healthy, right? There's maybe some people here on our call or on the meeting here that have a chronic disease. I was just talking about my father. You'll hear me talk about him throughout this. My father, in his 70s, has always been somewhat active his whole life, but in his 70s had a triple bypass and then did cardiac rehab after that. Shortly after cardiac rehab, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and was concerned. The doctors were concerned that he would not be able to withstand active treatment with the prostate cancer or the aggressive treatment because of his heart history. He had continued with his cardiac rehab, so he was strong enough to do the more aggressive prostate cancer treatment in his late 70s and is now cancer free. So that doesn't happen for everybody, but in his case it did. Most recently, he had another health issue. He was out gardening and had an infection and was able to fight off that infection partly because of his physical health. I just said he had a bypass. I just said he had prostate cancer and he had an infection, but he is otherwise healthy because he is active. He's participating in activities of daily life. He's living independently with it, which is still important to him. So those things, when we think about health, it's not merely physical health and mental health, but not merely absence of disease. And we are including physical and mental health in as we talk about health. They're very closely related. And so we'll touch on a little bit of that. You'll hear the term well-being thrown around also. And there is no sole determinant of individual well-being. Anytime I repeat myself or anytime I read from a slide, typically it's an important concept that I like people to hear. No one thing is going to make us feel good, feel well, right? It's continually changing. But in general is positive social relationships as well as good health. So particularly coming out of COVID, is connections with other people. So those positive social relationships and community. And what are we looking at as community? And so I like to think of health on a continuum. So I will put these all up. I had the motions in, but I'll put them all up. Again, not just the absence of disease, could be multidimensional. There could be physical health, there could be mental health. We want to strive for one end of that continuum of optimal, but it can slide backwards towards neutral and slide back and forth. Mortality is on one end. We often talk about death rates or mortality, but there's also morbidity or infirmity, not being able to enjoy those things you want to do in life because of morbidities or comorbidities. And there's lots of cool research going on specific comorbidities as we age. But negative health on one end, positive health on the other, and it will go on that continuum, and we will move around there a bit. So also a little bit more about well-being, thinking about individual well-being. Hey, I might feel great today, but how am I feeling in the community? How am I feeling in other places? How are people around me? We're not operating in silos, whether it be with health or wellness or physical activity, and how these things fit together. So we're talking about wellness in looking at what our community looks like as well. You could be part of several communities. We're all here. We're part of the University of Illinois community, and that's where we're fitting in right now. But when you walk out or shut down the Zoom call, you may be part of another community within your office or within your family or your church or wherever that might be. So we're looking at all of these parts of well-being and shifting away from only focusing on illness. So I wanted to make sure we are looking at those things and all on the same page of why are we talking about health and physical activity together? Also looking at premature death as well as longevity. So the number one biggest piece of that pie there is behavior. What can we change? What's modifiable that we can change by hereditary or behavior, our access to medical care or that community around us? So behavior is the biggest piece of the pie, and we have somewhat control over changing our behaviors. We can't always can change our outcome, but we can change our behaviors and how we're approaching different health issues. In this case, we're talking about physical activity and fitness today. But hereditary, as I just told the story of my dad, I now have a piece of that pie that's hereditary that I can't change, right? That's my dad, good and bad, right? The fact that he was able to beat it was great. But he will call and say, okay, what can I do for my workout, Jeanine? My arthritis is acting up. Can I change my behavior? Can I continue to go to cardiac rehab? Or continue with a trainer after that to bolster my behavior, to influence those things. And then other things that influence us in the community, the health of our community, individual behaviors. I do have just a quick chart on here of, it's called the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. Since that's the biggest piece of pie we can change to influence our health, looking at the trans-theoretical model there, different stages of change. I like this format mostly because of relapses on there. When I talk to people, when I give presentations, if I were to meet you personally or train with you, I don't ever expect any of us to flip on the switch, be active, or change a health behavior and never have to change it back. So when we're looking at health behaviors and health, we're talking about this continuum, not only of positive and negative health, but of continuum of getting ready to make those behavior changes. So it's just kind of a nice visual of, hey, we may relapse. I started exercising when I was over 40. I went to grad school. You heard me say I'm a non-traditional student. I was going to grad school, working full time. And guess what? I wasn't exercising as much as I had been previously. So those are things that are real life. We have things in life that might cause us to relapse back a little bit. And then working that in context with our community and what we have available to help us get back on track where we would like to be individually. So I'm going to take a breath there. That was a little bit about health, individual health, community health, what we're looking at, why we're talking about health across that lifespan. And I'm going to keep going, I think, but talking just a brief moment about the terms that we're going to use. I've been using the terms physical activity. I've been using the terms fitness. You can drop it in the chat, but I'm going to keep moving for the sake of time. These terms, if you're listening, if you would like to drop in the chat, you can. If you prefer the term physical activity, or if you prefer the term exercise or fitness, because to some people, those terms can mean different things. And in that context, exercise for some people can be scary. I've heard a lot of beginners talk about how physical or exercise is a scary word. They're not going to go out tomorrow and run a 5K. And I didn't go out the next day and run a 5K. I met that with my son. What I did was I had a couch to 5K program, more walking than running to start with. I ran for time, and we'll talk about those physical activity guidelines in a moment. So I ran for 30 minutes of health versus running for mileage. The mileage came secondary for me. So when we're talking about these terms, physical activity is any kind of movement, any bodily movement where you're moving skeletal muscles. This is our technical term. We have two different types of physical activity that we refer to often: leisure time physical activity or lifestyle physical activity. So leisure time, our exercise, sports, recreation, hobbies. We're going out to do those outside of what we're doing. Lifestyle physical activity counts towards those physical activity requirements and goals for health. So some of you may be have occupational physical activity where you're walking, lifting, those types of things. Transportation, walking or biking to work or school, hence the bike month shirt. They're doing bike to work. And it takes me shorter to bike to work than it does to drive to work. So I enjoy biking to work. And I get some of my activity time in that way. Household, cleaning, gardening, working around in the yard. So what household things are you doing that you can add in some lifestyle physical activity? So we're not telling you to exercise on top of everything you're already doing. We're looking at ways maybe to put that physical activity in with your life. So we're also looking, some of you may have desk jobs, and I am sitting right now because that's how my Zoom setup is. So some of you may have those desk jobs that you're sitting 8 hours out of the day. So then you go and do your exercise later. There is some new research going on about whether us weekend warriors, and I say us in there because sometimes I'm more sedentary, as I mentioned, when I was working more in research and in class. The irony of kinesiology classes are we're sitting for 3 hours in a graduate class, and as we're listening about we should work, right? So there's some new research being done right here at U of I and across the country and world about the science of inactivity. Can that weekend warrior, that run on the weekend, maybe you do all 150 minutes that are recommended or 75 minutes that are recommended if it's vigorous. So a 75-minute vigorous run for me is at least a 10K. I'm pretty slow, and I mean that not in a bad way, but is that enough to keep me healthy? So there's some interesting science about whether sitting too long and how that fits in. And I do see the idea of promoting 30 minutes of activity. I thank you, Andy, for dropping that in the chat. And I will definitely mention more about that too, because from the way I teach, time, for most people, time is more important in putting in those heart rates as well. And we'll talk about that too. So exercise, just briefly, exercise is a subset of physical activity. So it is repeated, the definition is there, but you can say, I'm going to exercise. So if you plan to go to exercise, plan physical activity, then that's exercise. So all exercise is physical activity. Fitness, I've used that word several times because this is what the scientists measure, is your fitness. Most of us don't have a good way of measuring our fitness, other than maybe if you have a smartwatch, and I'm wearing a Garmin, and Garmin will tell me what my VO2 max, estimated VO2 max is and things like that. But it's a characteristic, not a behavior. We have to change our behavior, whether it's the physical activity behavior, and then our fitness will change along with that. So health-related fitness and skill-related fitness are two different kinds of fitness, and I put them both on here. This is from my Kin 122 class, and some of the athletes go more towards that skill-related. But I also want to mention how that skill-related fitness is important. Agility and balance and coordination are probably those top 3 bullet points. As we age, we need to prevent falling. Right? So we don't want to fall. Maybe we're distracted looking down at our phones as we're walking. Maybe we have, I called it 2-dog yoga. I have a puppy and an older dog. I would hold one and walk the other. And maybe he sees a squirrel and we pull, and we need to be more agile or balanced or whatever it is for your family or your goals. So fitness is a subset of that. Most people in the US are inactive, so I will go through these very quickly. Most are not meeting those guidelines to benefit health, but what are those guidelines? So just a map of those states that are not active, and I have those links in the slide, and as I said, I will provide those to be sent out if you would like those slides. But looking in the South, typically people are less active where it's hot, maybe it's weather. Looking out west, Colorado, more active. So there's some stereotypes here too, and what we think about being inactive. But if you are currently inactive and you're trying to find ways to be active, you're not alone, right? Most of the country is trying to do that. So I'm about efficiency. I think I mentioned, I showed you my boys. I had 4 kids, 3 were in high school at the same time, crazy life, dogs, cats, kids, working full-time. So lots of things going on. So how do we fit in our physical activity with our lifestyle? Most common barriers or reasons people don't exercise, and I'm going to put that in those air quotes of exercise, because as I mentioned, physical activity, it's all good. Time constraints, we're too busy, schedule conflicts. I do not prescribe to the idea that, oh, just wake up earlier or just, put your shoes on and go. It's not that simple for most people. Sometimes we have to make sure we have a babysitter. Is it dark now at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Do we need to find a safe sidewalk? Am I female or a population that may be more stressed about being outside at dark alone? What neighborhood, lighting, infrastructure in our cities, sidewalks, lights, things like that. Bad weather. We are in Illinois. Come winter, as I'm looking at the window and it looks like it's clouding up now, but come winter or summer, it's either too hot or too cold. We had a couple air quality days this year, earlier in the summer, where being outside was detrimental, even if you were healthy. So just some ideas of why people are commonly not exercising or as physically active as they would like. But identifying that for you, then you can look at identifying which way to go after that. I'm going to run through some of these more quickly than I expected. Some myths for physical activity are there for you to see. Populations that have lower rates of physical activity: women, older adults, lower education, lower income. We have some race disparity, geographic location, and people with disabilities. So I want to keep those in mind, because sometimes we don't think about that community around us. Hey, it's great. I rented a VO bike today and I biked to work. And then I left it on the sidewalk so the next person coming behind me couldn't walk safely. So I like people to be aware of those things to help our fellow person and connect with them in being more active. Gender gaps. I'm teaching women's health and community health right now. So we do have some gender gaps in men versus women and being physically active. And so I wanted to mention those real quickly. Benefits of being physically active. So physical health benefits as well as mental health benefits here. Reduces risk of early death. We've got prevention and treatment of heart disease, coronary heart disease, as well as stroke, several different kinds of cancers, particularly the hormonal cancers. So my father's cardiac rehab actually helped with his treatment for prostate cancer. Obviously didn't prevent it, but helps with that treatment. Lowering high blood pressure. Many of us have high blood pressure, and they just changed those guidelines recently. Looking at cognitive function, bone health, arthritis as we're aging. Many of us have arthritis and different types of things as well. Mood quality and sleep. These all are things that are related to each other. So who is benefiting from physical activity? Everybody. Children, teenagers, older adults, people trying to manage their weight. I'm not going to focus on weight loss in this conversation today, because weight loss is an outcome. I want to think about behaviors. What are our behaviors and our processes? What can we do to be more active to help with all of those benefits? So looking at people with disabilities, old school thinking might have been, oh, you had a heart attack, don't exercise. Oh, you have a chronic disease, don't exercise. Or you have a disability or are differently abled, don't exercise. There are lots of ways to be inclusive with different chronic illnesses, abilities there as well. I love that last one. I have to leave it on there. Everyone under stress. I always open my Kin 122 class and I say, okay, is anyone not stressed? I had one person out of 100 raise their hand last semester. He said, I'm pretty chill. So, but I think most of us have stress. We may be experiencing symptoms of anxiety or depression, or being treated for that as well. And so exercise can help with those things also. And I include myself, I usually say we, us, because many of those things are there. All right, so how much exercise? We just said the benefits. How much exercise do we need? I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. The guideline is 2.5 hours per week or 150 minutes per week of moderate activity, which that's where if you've heard 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. So that's where that's coming from. I also mentioned the 75 minutes at vigorous intensity counts. You can definitely mix and match these things. So you want to aim for that 150 minutes a week of moderate, 75 or vigorous. So depending on what you're doing, what kind of activity, are you walking, are you running, are you biking, where your heart rate gets is what you want to base that on. And you can mix and match. So you can say, I've done 100 minutes of physical, I've done 100 minutes of moderate, and I've done 25 of vigorous. And that meets the threshold for health. The more, the better. But you want to strive for that. If you get under that, there is some newer research that if you're under those minutes, it is still beneficial. So you don't want to say, well, I'm never going to make 150 minutes. Any little bit counts. And I will mention that here in a minute as well. So talk test. How do you know what the intensity is, right? So you hear me, I'm talking pretty quickly. I'm a fast talker. I talk with my hands. I'm pretty passionate about what I do. Quick chart. Is it moderate? Can you carry on a conversation comfortably? If you can carry on a conversation, you're doing great with moderate. If you're able to sing, sometimes I try that when I'm out doing things by myself. So if you see the crazy lady singing, that's light. If you're able to move air, so the way your cardiac system and respiratory system work, if you're moving air, you're breathing heavier to move oxygen into your bloodstream. So the talk test is perfect. You don't need a fancy watch. You don't need to know your heart rate. Check your intensity on talking. If you're winded, can't catch your breath too much, hard to carry on a conversation, then that's more vigorous activity. So there's vigorous, the physical activity guidelines. Where am I getting those from? I'm putting that link there so that you know where they're coming from. The physical activity guidelines for America, and I'm smiling because there was, I think, 4 or 5 people associated with the University of Illinois affiliated with creating these 2018 guidelines. There was a professor from community health. There was a professor from kinesiology. There was he's a professor over at Pittsburgh now that he did his postgrad here, his postdoc here at U of I. So, and then some of our doctoral students went places and are working with some of the folks that were on this committee. So kind of cool connections to U of I, where they come from, these activities. There's guidelines for children and adolescents. So those are in the notes. I know we don't have folks on this call, but if you have kids or grandkids that you're concerned about being active with and setting that stage for them, my granddaughter, my daughter's son, the son that I beat in the half marathon, she started doing the Illinois Kids Marathon run from the time she could walk and is now on her cross country team. So I put those things out there. So in case you're working with people or people in your family that you know, what are those guidelines? Guidelines for adults are there, those 30 minutes or the 75 minutes. And also into there, so that was cardiac or aerobic activity, but adding in there 2 days a week of strength training or resistance training into that as well. So that last bullet point. So we often talk about aerobic training or resistance training. Key guidelines for older adults are similar, but they also include, depending on if there's a chronic illness or an injury, that would go for us adults too that are not necessarily older yet, but fit into that. If you have an injury, no pain, no gain's a myth. Some of those guidelines for people with chronic health conditions are there in those highlights as well, or in those guidelines. So in the highlights, move more. These are a few things I pulled from those guidelines. Move more, sit less. Seems pretty simple. Get all of that movement in. Any physical activity has health benefits. If you were familiar with the physical activities and recommendations before 2018, and you might have heard this before, 10 minutes at a time, you don't need to do 10 minutes at a time. Parking your car farther away works, parking your car or taking stairs. Any movement you do throughout the day, theoretically, my arm movement here counts, right? So some of you may be sitting, some of you may be walking, listening to this, but any movement counts. You can see immediate health benefits from physical activity, reducing anxiety, blood pressure. I'm one that I have anxiety symptoms at times, and going for a run before or after helps me. So looking at long-term health benefits, we already mentioned several of these, that youth physical activity can help improve cognition. That research came out of the University of Illinois. So that is there, preventing injury for falls, pregnant women in postpartum depression, looking at several different kinds of cancer as well. So those are some highlights there of benefits. Then we have managing other health conditions. So we had that school of thought that I mentioned. We have found that we, being researchers in the field, have found that health conditions can be managed and promoted, prevented and managed using physical activity instead of the idea of we're doing nothing. So decreasing pain for osteoarthritis. My dad called, his knee was acting up with his arthritis. What can he do differently? We put some strength training in. He talked to a trainer, working with health issues. So going to physical activity before going to maybe pills or medical intervention or in conjunction with it. So we've also got some key guidelines for safety there, as well as your being active. I want to talk about those types of physical activity, which I did a little bit already mention them. Aerobic activity, the 4 types that are important: aerobic activity, muscle strengthening, which those are both in the guidelines, and then adding flexibility and balance. We don't always think about those things. And then as well as bone strengthening. Many forms of physical activity duplicate, fall into multiple categories. For example, aerobic activity. When I go for a run, I'm getting aerobic activity, I'm getting bone strengthening, I'm getting a little bit of balance too, because when I'm going up on one leg, difference between walking and running, talk for another day. So looking at aerobic and strength activity, some examples there: jogging, brisk walks, jumping rope, those types of things. Muscle strengthening, you could do muscle strengthening with lifting weights. If you don't have weights, body weight is phenomenal. So you could work on squats. Getting up and down off the floor is body weight muscle strengthening. So when I was teaching group fitness at the Urbana Park District, we would get up and down off the floor the last couple of minutes, just practicing. How can you get up and down if getting up and down off the floor is important to you? I went to play with my grandson back in May, and he was 2.5, and I wanted to be able to play with him. So I could get up and down off the floor and be able to do things with him. That was important to me. Maybe you have no reason to be on the floor. So maybe you're carrying things and maybe lifting milk jugs or water jugs. Arm strength might be more important to you. So you could use pets. I mentioned my 2-dog yoga, using things around the house to get these activities in. I'm going to touch base on aerobic activity too. Dancing falls in there as well. Flexibility and balance are important. Some different ideas about getting that flexibility. As we age, we lose some of that. Balance, critically important. You can practice standing on one foot. I was about to stand up and demonstrate, but I don't think my camera is set for that. So, well, you can practice balance activity in your workout routine. And I tell people, throw yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone where you are. So where you're safe, where you can grab a wall or a chair, so that there's some muscle memory, especially walking around campus, right? We have those ice patches in the winter, so that you can maybe be a little bit more stable there. So more information from the National Institutes of Health and links where you can find that information. I want to just touch base a little bit more about older adults. So as we age, we're all hopefully age, going up 65 plus, very varied group. And I would say even below 65 plus, that below 65, all older adults and adults do not have the same conditions, right? You can put 2 40-year-olds next to each other, they might be very different. 2 50-year-olds, 2 60-year-olds, 2 70-year-olds. Hopefully one of the takeaways of this talk is do what's right for you. What of these things that you may be dealing with, or someone in your family may be dealing with, that can help you live your most healthy life, or towards that healthy life? So we know that exercise, even as we age, even if you've not been exercising, you can still exercise as you get older. Starting even at over 70 is beneficial. So anytime in that lifespan or restarting. So maybe you were an exerciser when you were 20 or 30 and kids came along and life stages, and now you're an empty nester like I was, and you want to get back into it. I've got more time for those long runs now that I don't have children at home. So life stages change there as well. So some of that list on the right side under the woman holding the weights, these are things that happen to us as we age, no matter what. So my challenge for myself is to do what I can to either slow that down. I don't want to necessarily slow down aging, but slow down the aging effects. So it's never too late, as I mentioned. You can always start being active. And what is it that you want to do from your lifespan, whether it's now or later in life, that keeps you going to be the person that you want to be when you get there? It's different for all of us. My guess is if I had you drop in the chat what your goals are, what's your motivation, it might all be different. Health benefits associated. I already mentioned several of these, so I just wanted to throw that up again. I wanted to finish and wrap up on a more positive note. So there's all of these benefits we know from physical activity. So why are we doing it? More benefits, reduce anxiety, lower risks of falls or fall-related injuries. Some of that research is going on right here at U of I as well. So as we age, we know these benefits are good for us, right? People are saying it's good, but how do we do it? And working that into our lifestyle. Some quick things that you can think about individually. What is your motivation? What gets you started? Self-efficacy, number one predictor of whether you're exercise or fitness, if you'll stick with it. Do you really think you can do it? So if you've never been swimming before and you don't like the water, swimming is not something you may want to do. I have people all the time say, I'm never going to run. I don't like to run. Then don't run. I don't like to run, to be honest. I like how I feel after I run. So the self-efficacy, I feel like I can do it. Attitude. Find something that you like to do. You may not like exercise, but do you like playing with your dog in the yard? Do you like walking with your friends? So having a positive attitude and thinking about something you like to do. What are the pros and cons? Decisional balance, weighing those costs and benefits. Okay, if I just go out right now and I walk for my 10 minutes right now, I can get 10 minutes in and I know I'll feel better and that'll quash that anxiety. So I think about that decisional balance. Social norms. Do you have people around you that are exercising? Locus of control. What's within your control to do? Do you have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C? And the outcome expectation. I always tell people with your outcome expectation, kind of keep that a little loose. We can't control the outcome always, right? I can say I want to lose weight, but we can't control if we lose a pound. But I can control whether I get my 30 minutes of walking in today, if that's my goal. A tool for SMART goals, individual SMART goals. You want your goals to be specific, measurable, adjustable. What happens if I plan to walk outside today and it rains? Do I have access to go to the arc or a treadmill? Or maybe today I just take off and then do an hour tomorrow if that works for me. And that's possible as well. Looking for social support is a great influence on physical activity. For me, it came from my family and friends. So there are people that say, oh, you don't need to go exercise, you're fine. If it's important to you, find some friends that say, hey, I'll go walk with you. Or, hey, I'm going for a walk. Do you want to come? And maybe you invite somebody else along with you. Do it together. Physical environment, we talked about that as well already. So a couple other factors that affect physical activity. Parks with you where people live. So maybe you explore where you have a park in your neighborhood. Maybe you are looking for safe sidewalks. This chart's for youth, and then school districts. So I find with some adults that across that lifespan, what your children are doing in school are dictating maybe what you have available to you as well. So that's why I include school-age children. Also, schools, guidance, does the school have a track that you could go walk around the track? Do we have activities for that? Things communities can do. So where you live is important. We know that where you live, what you have access to is important. So if you want access to something, I encourage everyone to get involved in their community and think about those things as well. How can you incorporate physical activity into your daily life? I've got a list there: clean the house, do your yard work, walk the dog, Park further away. I think I've mentioned most of those already. Join a sports team. Pickleball. I had to throw pickleball on there because I know a Champaign Park district just redid their pickleball courts over at Hessel Park. Okay, so I'm also going to say incorporating take the bus instead of drive. There is research that people that take public transportation are actually more active because you have to walk from your bus stop to your house or your bus stop to where you're going. So that park farther away idea. Walk or bike instead of taking the bus or driving. Like for me, it takes shorter to bike than it does to drive. I do have to drive when it's hot or if it's pouring down rain, but those are things that we can do. Read while you're on a stationary bike if you have reading to do or watching TV, those things to fit that physical activity in there as well. Or maybe you want to take a break from it. Sometimes I put music on and I dance around the kitchen while I'm cooking. So that counts as physical activity as well. Remember, any movement is good movement. And then I'm just going to finish up with some other resources here. I've listed the Park District resources, Campus Rec. If you are interested in getting started, you're not sure where to start, Kinesiology department does have several research programs that you could get free training, free participation in some of those things in different research studies to learn how to be active. There are other gyms in town. I'm not going to promote any single gym, but thinking about your needs, what you are, where you are across the aging and health spectrum, and what you need. So just mentioned social groups you could check out. There's running clubs in town, there's walking groups. Then you can go to technology, 5K apps, YouTube videos, and other things like that as well. Always check your source, though. I have to put that caveat in there. But most importantly, find something that you might enjoy, even if it's not the activity that you enjoy. Find the activity that makes you feel good, right? You want to find something that's going to help promote that health you're looking for and supports your goals. And then I'm going to just stop there. And that picture of my dog, that's my puppy. He's just over a year old. I'm training him on a couch to 5K plans to run with me. So that was part of what keeps me going and got me running more consistently this summer. And that's all I had. I will stop there. I went a little bit over. My apologies.
Oh, no, thanks, Jeanine. I think that was full of great information. I want to open it up in case anyone has any questions they'd like to ask you. If you don't feel comfortable just speaking them out, you can put them in the chat and I will read them to you, whatever anyone wants to do. So I'll open it up for a few minutes to see what people think.
I will provide these slides so that you can have a copy of them. I know I went through some very quickly. And just for anyone that joined us late, I'm wearing the Bike Month shirt purposefully because I did bike to get my free t-shirt last week. So I don't know if anybody else had that as well. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm always love working with people to find what they're interested in doing.
Well, I will ask one. So I like to use kettlebells to
Yes.
do my weightlifting. I also try to do a little bit of yoga and I'm on the treadmill, but I always feel like the days that I'm doing one, I feel like I'm not stretching if I'm doing my kettlebells. And then I feel like, oh, that's bad because, at the end of the day, I need to be able to get up off the floor. And then I'm thinking, oh, I should probably just work on getting up off the floor. So I feel like I'm sort of all over the place on my exercise. Is it better to find one thing and stick with it and stay doing it? Or is my all over the place today, I'm doing this, a viable option?
Definitely a viable option to be all over the place. Do what makes you feel good. Sometimes I like the idea of variety in a workout because if you get used to the same workout, you don't see as much improvement. You'll see improvement for a while, then it might plateau out. So changing it up is also beneficial. So there's benefits to doing both, depending on what you're working on. So kettlebells, that's a great form of strength training. You can also do a little bit of aerobic on the same day. There's no hardcore right or wrong way to do that. So you could do a little bit of strength training, a little bit of cardio, a little bit of strength training, a little bit of aerobic, right? A little bit of stretching all in one day. Or maybe one day you do yoga and one day you do your strength training and 3 days a week you run. What I didn't mention was the idea of recovery, rest and recovery. So I did leave that out of my slide. So I'm glad you asked that. It's when you're building strength, muscle strength, it comes from your muscles actually tearing and repairing. So if you do a strenuous workout and you're stretching and building strength and resistance training, you want to give that group of muscles a day to recover, maybe 24 hours to 48 hours with that. Closer to 48, depending on how intense that activity was. So that recovery time is when your body is actually building the muscle and that fitness is changing. So some people think, and I'm glad you mentioned this because it is, some people get in that mindset of, oh, I've got to stay moving. I've got to stay moving. Rest is okay. Recovery is okay. It's when it becomes more of a, I'm recovering and resting permanently that it becomes a problem. My mother's in her 70s, just turned 80 actually. And when she was in her 70s, she has a personality where she had to exercise every day. And so she was exercising. She doesn't like exercise. For most of her life, she didn't exercise. She got on the recumbent bike and she felt like if she missed a day, it was horrible. Until I talked to her about recovery. We were going up a hill walking and she was out of breath. So the intensity of going uphill is also higher than on flat ground. So walking up the hill was more intense for her. I said, Mom, it's okay to call it recovery the next day and to skip that type of workout if you need to, so you don't injure yourself. So a skipping rest recovery day is also beneficial to injury prevention. So to answer that question, I don't know if I answered it in a long way around, but injury prevention is key as we age too, because we can't always do what we did when we were younger. If you were active, for me, I'm doing more when I'm older, but knowing your body and what your body can do is really important. The first trainer I went to before I was in this field, I actually embarrassed myself at the gym because he wasn't used to training with older people. And I was over 40 at the time. And so I dropped weights and I fatigued out and I couldn't hold it up because I didn't have arm strength. And I was so embarrassed I didn't go back. So, and then injury, I had an overuse injury. And so I switched to biking and swimming more. But I had somebody kind of say, well, we're doing 5 miles today. And I couldn't. So I did have to advocate for myself with even the doctor. And I say I couldn't because of health reasons. So when I went to the doctor of my injury, she wanted to boot me. And I had to advocate as an older woman saying, why are you putting me in the boot? I had a doctor offer me a boot for comfort. And I said, the podiatrist, why are you putting me in the boot? She said, so you can heal and get back to 100%. Okay, that's the reason for being in the boot, for being inactive. So I don't want to say all inactivity is bad, but do what feels good for you. If you feel like it's all over the place and that's making you feel stressed, then maybe routine is more something that you need. Some people like the routine, like that calendar block. I'm looking up because I have a calendar where I block out time. I personally like to do my aerobic activity 3 days a week because I can only block out so much time a day. And then I get that strength training in a couple other days. Sometimes I get it in walking lunges while I'm just out walking the dog or things like that. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that question. I answered that in a long way around, I think.
Jeanine, does when you're doing the strength training and stuff, does that count towards your 150 minutes a week or no?
Yeah. So it depends on how hard your strength training session is. So for example, the Urbana Park District has something called Work It Circuit going on right now. If your heart rate is going up, if you're doing a circuit type strength training where you're lifting weights, then you're doing lunges and your heart rate is up, yes, it counts as both. So if you're just doing lunges, you're not breathless, you can sing a song while you're doing your maybe bicep curls, then no, it doesn't count towards that. So that is a great question. So some people do high intensity interval training, which mixes in high intensity bouts with maybe some resistance training in between. So you're bringing that heart rate up, bringing it back down. So it can count as both, but not always.
Thanks.
Yeah. If you need suggestions on how to count them as both, the high intensity interval training is interesting, right? Some people really like it because you can do that in a shorter period of time. You're getting that vigorous exercise. Some people, if you don't like your heart rate up, if you don't like getting sweaty, maybe you have to go back to work or to a meeting, doing that more moderate activity for longer might be beneficial. Or at your desk with resistance bands, or taking that 10-minute break to fit in some of that, 5-minute break to fit in some of that resistance training too, is definitely doable. And when you're looking at that resistance training, maybe looking at full body. So I didn't talk much about functional movement or full body, but arms, you can do arms one leg days, legs the next. I tend to do full body workouts every other day. That's functional for me, depending on the goals. And that's where that last slide I had about finding a trainer that might know what you need and can give you suggestions is really helpful.
We really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.